So today I want to talk about something very obvious. And it's so obvious that it completely permeates every aspect of our lives. And when we don't acknowledge it, it's really what causes all of our suffering and the harm that we cause in our world. What I want to talk about is interdependence, one of my favorite topics. Um, and we talk about it quite a lot, but I know for myself, I really don't get it. That it's easy to talk about it on the level, but if I really understood it, then I wouldn't judge others that I care about. I wouldn't have to defend my opinions or my ideas thinking that they're mine, and I wouldn't feel lonely or left out or judged. And so remembering our interdependence is so vital in counteracting the view of a self-centered, independent, solid self, and that's really what causes all of our problems. The other day, Jason was talking about a talk he heard from Thupten Jinpa, where Thupten Jinpa was talking about how important it is that so often we simplify things. We think this person is inherently bad, they're like this, and we see them in a very, very narrow, simplified view. And Thupten Jinpa said, what we need to do is to complexify things, to expand them to seeing things as interdependent, interconnected, all the causes and conditions, and many, many different factors. And I've been playing with that word. I really have enjoyed complexifying things and seeing how complex everything is, and it's not simple and separate. And because again and again, when I make things simple and separate, my mind gets very narrow and I run into all sorts of problems. I've also been playing around with the idea that when I have an interaction with someone that doesn't go well, I've been saying it's my self-centered thought is bumping into their self-centered thought. It's like, we're having a collision of the self-centered thoughts bumping into each other, and that happens sadly all the time. But so fortunately, we have the Dharma to try to shift our minds away from this. And again, recently I was reading a book by His Holiness, and I think he probably gets asked this question a lot of like, if you could give the essence or the one word to describe the Dharma, what would it be? And in this book, he said 2 words that describe Buddhism are universal interdependence. And I really liked that because, again, it's seeing things on a much, much bigger view in our completely interdependent way. But on the flip side, just the other day, someone asked him, what's the essence of Buddhism? And he said to have a good heart and to think of helping others, which I love because those are the 2, that's kind of emptiness, realizing interdependence, and compassion, bodhicitta. Those are pretty much the 2 views that we're trying to understand because that's really how things really exist. And if we can really see those, then we can exist in a much better way, and they complement each other so well, kind of in a positive feedback loop of one supporting the other and taking away our confusion and our ignorance. And this is kind of similar to what Venerable Sepwil was talking about the other day. But for talking about interdependence, today I want to talk about it from a different perspective, kind of one that I tend to think about a lot, or have a more I play with a lot more as far as looking at it from the perspective of animals and plants. And so a lot of animals live in systems where they almost function as one unit, being completely dependent on each other. And we got a good example of this, Venerable Losang and I, this summer, of working with bee colonies and yellow jackets, as we have to sadly remove some of them to try to keep them from harming other people. And so yellow jacket colonies, they start out as one single female bee who's been fertilized. She nests in the wintertime, and then she builds a little paper nest, usually in the ground, and then lays some eggs that hatch into adult workers. And those adult workers then kind of take care of the colony as far as building the nest, collecting food, defending the nest, and then feeding the queen and the larvae. And the adult yellow jackets are out busy, as we've seen, collecting food from our plates when we're sitting outside, or getting different foods, plants and fruits and flowers, and even little proteins and things as they forage around. But they're not actually eating that food. they chew it up and they bring it back to the colony and feed it to the larvae, which eat it. And then the larvae produce some sort of sugary nectar substance, and that's what feeds the bees. So they're completely, supporting each other. And then, which is quite beautiful. And then over time, sadly, as the colony grows, then some different eggs are formed for the females and males, and those fly off, breed, and then all the males die, and only a single or a couple fertilized females remain, and they go back into kind of hibernation in the wintertime, and then the cycle starts again. So it's quite a complex process of completely depending on each other. Let's see, another organism I want to talk about is the largest organism in the world, and it weighs nearly 13 million pounds, and it spreads over 106 acres of land. And it's so big, it's been given the name Pondo, which means I spread in Latin, I guess. It's in Utah, aspen trees, yeah. So this is one single colony, or it is one species, and it spreads. Aspen trees can reproduce by seed, but most often they reproduce just by sending up suckers, as we see in our garden, and Venerable Simke knows as she's trying not to have all the trees completely take over the yard. But this one organism is called a single organism because it's grown from the same root system. It's all completely genetically identical, and you can tell the difference between one clone system and another. In the fall, the leaves will turn a different color. Maybe you can see in the photo a slightly different color at the foreground, but it's one completely connected organism. And this, I think, Pondo, as it's been named, has 40,000 different individual trees. And the scientists haven't been able to pinpoint when it first kind of came into existence, but they estimated that it started at least around the last ice age. So it keeps continuing and surviving in this one kind of single organism. And it's because it's all the same, made out of the exact same genes. So another organism I want to talk about is that we're much more intimately familiar with is humans. And we think we're so special and smart as humans, unique with our special genes and how we can completely dominate and destroy the world. But, but when we look at it, we can look at that our body is actually 99% of our body is bacterial genes. There's only 1% of our genes that are kind of distinctly human. 99% of our genes are human. So we're not really that different from a lot of other organisms. And another way of looking at this is that 70 to 90% of all the cells in our body are bacterial. And so most of our body is actually made of bacterial cells. And so within our body, there's a population of over 100 trillion microorganisms that make up this body of our kind of microbiome. And it's those microorganisms that pretty much run the show of our entire system as far as our digestion, circulation, everything. Even the food that we think that we're eating and digesting, it's actually little microorganisms that are really breaking it down and then making those nutrients available to us. So it's fun looking at these kind of different ways that things exist and seeing that we don't exist in the way that we think we do, that we exist so much more interdependently and in a much more complex system. And so when we really keep thinking about this and following the advice of His Holiness of thinking about our interdependence, then that brings that sense of a warm heart that we're not separate and solid, but we exist in this very complex system, and we can feel kind of wonder and gratitude and appreciate it so that we can really work more in harmony and live as we really are in a much more interdependent and connected way.